You mentioned in your bio that you came to romance in the COVID pandemic times, and
Yeah.
I also similarly consider myself a late in life romance reader because I
Yeah.
didn't start when I was 12. I started when I was
Right.
in my 20s.
Right.
So I'm curious, first of all, what stopped you from reading romance before then?
Well, I wouldn't it's not like I'd never read romance before. I should qualify that. I had read romance since I was a teenager, but it wasn't like the thing I always read. It was like a book here and there. When I was younger, I pretty much only read historical, like not, I love contemporary, I read contemporary all the time now, but at that time it was historical. And I think growing up as we do in our society and the things that we're told and the taboo around it, it just felt kind of taboo. And so it was
Mhm.
fun to read it because it felt taboo, but I also didn't read it all the time because it was taboo in a way. I don't think that way at all anymore, but
Yeah.
when you're a teenager, that's how you feel. And so I'd read it here and there. I mean, I've been a huge reader. I love to read. I huge reader my whole life. And I loved historical fiction in general. I read a lot of that, but I don't know, and then there'd just be like, in my 20s, every once in a while I'd be like, God, I just need a romance. And I'd read them here and there, but it wasn't all the time. It wasn't the main thing I read. And then the pandemic was like, I had a bunch of stuff on my TBR and a bunch of books, and they just kind of, were like literary fiction and not always dealing with light, happy things. And I was like,
Yeah.
I just cannot handle this right now. Like, we got heavy stuff going on politically. We're like stuck in our homes. We've got like I just was like, I can't do that. And I just was craving something light and happy. And I just dove into romance. And so that was the point when it became the main thing I read.
Mhm.
And I just kind of like truly fell in love with the genre, I think, and saw a lot more sides of it. It's such a big, expansive genre. And so I read a lot of, different pieces of it. And it just became the only thing I wanted to read because it does so much. But I also, again, knew there would be that happy ending. So even if it was a hard ride along the way to get there, I still would be happy. And it just became the thing that was keeping me, like really keeping me sane during that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there are any things, any specific facets or layers of romance that you uncovered that maybe like were breaking assumptions that you had about the genre once you really started diving into it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for sure. I think the genre has evolved a lot,
Yeah.
obviously, over time. And so some of the books I read when I was younger, might have been some of the ones more from like the 90s where it wasn't like totally problematic, but it also maybe wasn't the same kind of empowerment I think a lot of people try to right now.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think, I don't know, I just saw how much depth there was to a lot of these stories, how well written so many of them were, which I think, is kind of a thing that people are like, oh, these books are terrible and whatever.
Yeah.
But I just got so much joy out of them.
Mhm.
And so I was like, that's what's important, right? Like we really want to enjoy this, but I saw so many things like social commentary in books and just the insight into our really the human condition. I mean, these books are about characters more than anything, right?
Mhm.
Um, and it's exploring what makes us tick, how do we feel, how do we all of those things. And so I just really appreciated it in this whole new way.
Yeah. I think for me, really compelling romance is very character focused and
Yeah.
very it's
Yes.
diving into why do we have these emotions and making
Mhm.
space for big emotions.
Yes.
Whereas literary fiction, for example, tends to be like it's focusing on small emotions and then not really like it's like, oh, there's an emotion there, but we're not going to explore it. We're just going to have it
Yeah.
do something really weird to the character.
One of the things I love in a book is when I can read about someone who is so different from myself. And I think this is the power of literature in general. But like, I maybe in their situation would never react the way they do, but I can totally understand why they do. So if a book is
Mm,
well written and I can understand those motivations and I can kind of live, through that person's perspective. Like maybe I'm like, oh God, I would never, but I get your reaction. I understand why you did that. And that's why I'm a firm believer in that reading in general makes us more empathetic because
Hmm.
we can kind of see and understand and think of things through different people's perspectives. But
Absolutely. I think there are studies that back that up.